Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. I'd like to thank Julian Mussolino for being with us today. Julian is a cognitive scientist, public speaker, and author who holds a dual appointment in the Rutgers School of Arts and Sciences Psychology Department and the Center for Cognitive Science. Born and raised in France, Julian studied in Europe at the University of Geneva in Switzerland and at the University of North Wales in the UK. He has also studied in the United States at the University of Maryland and the University of Pennsylvania. Julian's research interests include specific aspects of the human mind, such as our capacity to acquire language, to reason, and to think critically, as well as the interface between science and society. Julian, take it from here.
Thank you very much, Leon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And hello and welcome everyone who is out there listening. I'm delighted to be with you today. And I'm going to talk to you about a set of topics and issues that are very close to my heart, very dear to my heart. So to begin, I would like to tell you upfront why this matters, why this should matter to you. It should matter to you almost no matter who you are. So regardless of your profession, whether you work for a company or self-employed, regardless of the size and nature of your organization, regardless of your experience level, whether you are an entry-level employee or part of senior management, this will be relevant to you. In fact, this will be relevant to you as long as your job involves thinking, planning, judging, and decision-making, which I hope would apply very broadly. So what is this going to be about? It's going to be about a toolkit that I'll begin to describe that will help you improve the power, the precision, and the efficiency of your ability to think, learn, plan, communicate, strategize, prioritize, set goals, judge, evaluate, and make decisions. In other words, it's a set of tools that will, at least in principle, allow you to use your brain and your mind optimally. Now, what is this for? What can you apply this to do? Well, the nice thing is that these tools can be used to improve any aspect of your professional lives, whether it's you're beginning and you're trying to find out what it is that you'd like to do, or whether you are already engaged in some professional activity and you'd like to get better at what you do, or whether you're thinking about transitioning from your current role to another role. This will be relevant to you. How does it work? What is it based on? Well, the tools I'm going to describe to you and the ideas I'm going to describe to you are grounded in the best research that the behavioral sciences have to offer. And by behavioral sciences, I mean psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science. What's interesting is that these tools and ideas are developed in the ivory tower in research departments, and they're not always well known or understood outside of these scientific disciplines. So to give you a sense of what I'm going to do, I want to start with an analogy. Suppose you've never been to the great city of London and you'd love to discover it, you'd love to learn more about it, but you only have a very short amount of time. So what can you do? One thing that people often do is they hop onto a double-decker bus, like the one you see there, and they take a tour of the city, which gives you a sense of the main monuments, the main highlights, right? So that gives you a sense of the city. But of course, if you want to learn more, you'll have to come back on your own time and meander through the streets and walk around and really discover the city. So by analogy, I'm not going to be able to do justice to the entire field of critical thinking because we only have a short amount of time together. But I'll do the equivalent of giving you a tour on a double-decker where I'll show you what the main highlights are. And I'm hoping that you will be intrigued and interested and curious, because I think that these tools really matter. They matter to all of you, and I hope that you'll be interested in maybe reaching out to me and learning more about these fascinating tools and ideas. So let me give you a sense of where we're going to go today. Let me give you a roadmap. First, I'm going to try to illustrate the problem that critical thinking is trying to address in a nutshell, so you get a sense of what this is really all about. Then we'll talk about the hidden forces that shape your thinking and the decisions you make. Then I'm going to focus on 3 examples, 3 out of many, many possible examples, of course, and their consequences or potential consequences in the business world for you to see how relevant and applicable these ideas are. Then I'll describe what I call mindware, these powerful tools that you can use to boost your brain power. I'll talk about the 5 virtues of critical thinking, and then at the end I'll mention a few, because there are many resources to maybe get you started on your journey to becoming a more efficient thinker and decision maker. So let's begin with the problem in a nutshell. And here we're going to have a little fun because this is going to be interactive. So you guys are going to take a poll. And the question, you see now these 2 characters, these 2 giants. The question that will be posed to you is, which of these 2, the one in the foreground or the background, appears to you to be taller than the other?
Okay, the poll is open. Please vote. Please select one, the one in the background or the one in the foreground. Okay, the poll is still open. Which figure do you see taller? The results are in.
All right.
People have voted the one in the background, they say, is taller. What do you think of that?
That's right. That's exactly what happens. All of us, if we are, healthy human beings who are sighted, will see that the character in the background appears to be taller than the one in the foreground. But what's interesting is that we can, of course, try to measure whether this is actually true. So if we there we go. If we have a yardstick, so here's the height, you see the red arrow of the character in the foreground, and then if we simply move it, no trick, it's not getting different in length, we realize that our visual sense actually fooled us. The 2 characters are exactly of the same, of equal height. So it's a visual illusion. Now that you know this, notice that you still can't help but see one as taller than the other. So the moral of the story here is that seeing, for those of us who are sighted, is something that we do all the time. Every waking hour, we see things, so we're good at it. We have large areas of our brain dedicated to visual processing, and yet our visual system can lead to systematic errors, like the one that you just fell prey to. Moreover, the mechanisms that lead to these errors are hidden from us. We don't know why it is that our brains, upon seeing this image, computes the size in such a way that we think that one is taller than the other. Unless, of course, you take a course on visual perception, then you'll learn why, but you don't really know intuitively why. And to correct these errors, we have designed specific instruments to enhance the power and precision of our senses, like, for example, a very simple measuring tape or a ruler where we can actually measure objectively the height of the characters and determine that we have been fooled by our senses and that they are, in fact, of equal height. So now I want to transfer the analogy from seeing to thinking, which is something that I hope all of you do every day in your professional lives. And it turns out that the 2 worlds, the world of seeing and the world of thinking, are really analogous. Thinking is something we do all the time in our professions, in our jobs, in our personal lives, in our social lives, in our political lives. And yet, just like seeing, thinking can lead to systematic errors. These errors can have important consequences in all aspects of our lives, from the very personal to the professional to the societal and political. The mechanisms that lead to these errors, just like the case of visual perception, are often hidden from us. We don't know how our thinking actually works consciously, and we don't know why we make those errors, unless, of course, you study this scientifically. And to correct these errors and gaps in our thinking, knowledge, understanding, we as a scientific community, as a species, have designed specific instruments to enhance the power and accuracy of our thinking. And that's what critical thinking is all about, is to try to think optimally, to use our brains and minds in the best possible way that we can. So I want to give you an example of that by analogy to the seeing example. And because this is a business-oriented webinar, I want to talk to you about the stock market. And we're going to focus here on the period from 1998 to 2001. And we're going to take a look at three things. In the left column, I'm going to show you a number of funds that people could and did invest in back then. In the middle column, we'll see the annualized return rate, so how well these funds performed. And then on the far right, in the right column, we'll take a look at how the average investor, so your friend, your colleague who is investing for maybe retirement or college for their kids, how well did they do compared to how well the funds actually did? So here's a list of funds. The names don't really matter. You'll notice at the bottom that it includes a study of 700 mutual funds at the time between that period. So let's take a look now at how well the funds did. They did on average quite well, ranging from a sort of rather unimpressive 2.8% all the way to 16% with almost 14%, almost 6%. So the funds did quite well during that period. Now let's take a look at what the average investors did. And what's shocking is that given how well the funds did, the average investors did very, very poorly. In fact, they lost a lot of money. And if you accumulate everything, billions of dollars were lost. So of course, we might want to ask, why is it? How come average investors did so poorly when the actual funds themselves did so well? Well, to understand that, to understand the thinking that went behind those disastrous decisions, we have to take a closer look. So here I'm going to show you a graph which on the horizontal axis, you have the period of time that we've been talking about, right, from 1998 to 2001. On the vertical axis, we have the value of the funds. And here, let's take a look at, I made this up. It's not the actual data. It's what the data would look like to give you an idea. So here we see two things. We see on the one hand, you see the red line now, we see an upward trend. We see that over time, from 1998 to 2001, the value of the funds has actually gone up. That's why the funds did well. At the same time, we see a lot of fluctuations, peaks and valleys, volatility. That's the two features of the graph. So if we take a closer look now, we can begin to understand what went wrong in the thinking of the individuals, that the average investors that lost all that money. So let's say that a person decides to invest in a particular fund. So let's say they buy the fund here at that particular point in time, and then they start tracking. So the value is whatever it is. It's a little bit higher maybe. And then they start tracking the fund, and you see that the value starts to fluctuate. It goes a little bit up and down, up, down. And then you see at some point a big spike downwards. It goes down and down and down and down. And of course, the investors start to panic. They think, well, how far down can that go? I'm going to lose everything I've invested. So maybe it's time to let go and sell. And they tend to sell the fund. So now notice what's happened. A number of things have happened here. One is that most investors, most average investors, did not stay in the fund for the entire duration, but a shorter period of time. Fact number one. Number two, notice that in this scenario, they bought high when the value was high, and because they got scared, they sold low, which is precisely the opposite of what you're supposed to do to make money. To make money, you're supposed to buy low and sell high. So these are errors in thinking. Which are due, we now understand, because this has been studied extensively, how people deal with financial decisions. It's due in part to overconfidence. People think they actually understand the market better than they do, and they can track it, and they can play it, and they can time it. It's due to the fact that people are trading too much. Instead of putting their money in and waiting for a few years, they try to micromanage and check every day, every week, or something like that. It comes from not really understanding the fact that sometimes fluctuations are due to random events, and it's just chance, and there's nothing to it beyond that. And it's due to something that's called loss aversion. It's a psychological property where people Of course, we like winning things. We like, say, making money. Making $100 feels good, but losing $100 feels far worse than it feels good to win $100. So there's an asymmetry there, and that's called loss aversion. So the moral of the story then is that if you look at people's minds, my mind, your mind, everybody's minds, we have a number of biases. They're called cognitive biases, of which we're not aware. And of course, we also have, all of us, we're not angels after all, we're imperfect creatures. We have certain gaps in our understanding of various ideas and various systems. These can lead to things in this particular example like overconfidence, loss aversion, not understanding the role of chance. And that in turn can have catastrophic consequences in this particular case in the domain of personal finance. But notice, and here I want to emphasize this, that the average investors that were putting their money in those funds were unaware of their own biases, like loss aversion, like overconfidence. Because of course, if they had been aware, they would have acted differently and they would have made money. This means that the kinds of forces that guide your thinking very often are hidden from the thinker himself or herself. And these biases are very widespread. So I want to illustrate this to you because it's a very important point. So we're going to talk now about those hidden forces that shape our thinking and the decisions that we make. And we're going to begin with another interesting example. So we're going to turn to a poll again. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. The question is, do you think that you know how a bicycle works? Pretty simple question. And here you'll be given a scale from 1 to 5 to indicate your confidence in your understanding and knowledge of how a bicycle works.
Great. The poll is open. Do you think you know how a bicycle works? Please vote now. There are 5 choices. We'll leave it open a few more seconds. Okay. So we see that the highest response is for high confidence, followed by moderate confidence, followed by perfectly confident, followed by slight confidence, and the lowest return was on not confident at all. So high confidence top, not at all confident lowest.
Wonderful. And what's the mean? What are the values sort of like cluster? Can we tell that from the poll?
The cluster toward the higher end.
That's right. The clusters towards the higher end. Exactly what the research shows. So most people, when asked a question like that, will say, well, yes, bicycle's a pretty simple device. I've ridden one. I've seen one. I think I'm pretty confident that I know how it works. Great. Oh, and now the computer is, oh, there we go. So now I'm going to have you, dear audience, engage in a little exercise. So you see this picture here of a schematic bicycle on the left, which is incomplete. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you have a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, is to complete that picture by finishing to draw the frame with a solid line, then putting in the pedals, as you see the little diagram for the pedals, and putting in the chain, the dotted line, so that when you're done, you've drawn and assembled a fully functional bike. So we'll give you a few moments to do that if you have a piece of paper in front of you and a pen or a pencil.
Okay, great. We'll give you a few minutes to do that. So frame, pedals, and chain.
That's right.
Okay. So Julian, I think they finished that.
Oh, wow, that was quick. Wonderful. Okay, so now what I want to do is show you, here's a little animation, what a actual functioning bike looks like with the frame fully built in and the chain and the pedals. And I want to ask you the simple question. Look at what you drew and now compare that to what an actual functioning bike looks like, and tell us whether you got everything right or not.
Okay, we have a new poll open.
Okay, wonderful.
Did you get everything right? Did you get everything right?
And be honest with
Yes or
yourself, of
no?
course. The purpose is not to, the purpose is to try to see if you really did. We won't say that. We won't share the results. It's just for us.
We won't share the individual results.
That's right. Yes, of course.
Okay, a few more seconds to finish. And the majority said no, they didn't get everything right.
Right, an honest crowd.
Yes, about 20% more said they didn't get it right versus those that said that they did.
Right, and that's again what you see emerge from the research. So you can see here, these are examples drawn from actual research of people, male, female, drawing a bike inaccurately. So I want you to think about this for a second. This is really, really interesting because on the one hand, people, including all of us, including you guys, think ahead of time, well, of course, I'm confident. Yes, I think I know how a bike works. But when you're put to the task and you actually do it, you realize that you don't really know nearly as much as you thought you did how a bike works. That illustrates the idea, the notion of overconfidence. All of us very often tend to be overconfident about our abilities and our skills. And this is discussed in a wonderful book called The Knowledge Illusion that you might be interested in taking a look at. So this illustrates the operation of one of those cognitive biases, overconfidence, of which you see a map of them here. We as behavioral scientists have uncovered dozens. So our thinking can go awry in many, many different ways, leading to different kinds of errors and biases and distortions. So now I want to illustrate the fact that the mechanisms, the biases that push us to think in one direction or the other, that make us think that we know how a bike works, are in fact hidden from us, which is really tricky. So to do this, I want to briefly illustrate to you this very interesting bias called the status quo bias. And it starts with a puzzle. So I'm going to show you here on this simple graph a number of countries on the horizontal axis, countries mostly from Western and Northern Europe, so Denmark, Austria, Germany, France, Belgium, etc. And on the vertical axis, we'll see proportions of the people in those countries who are organ donors, right, who agreed in case of a car accident, in case of death, to donate their organs. This was done about 15 years ago, so they don't reflect what's happening today, but the study was done about 15 years ago. And what we see is, when we look at the graph, a very interesting difference between what looks like two groups of countries. On the right, if you look at the blue bars, countries like Austria and France and Poland and Sweden, you see that almost everyone in those countries is an organ donor. Of course, adults who drive and everything, 99%, 98%. On the other hand, if you look at the left, you see that there are four countries, Denmark, the Netherlands, the UK, and Germany, where a very small proportion of the population actually are organ donors. And of course, the question is, why is it? Why is there such a difference between these different countries? So when people start to think about this, I could have polled you, but it would take maybe a bit too much time because the answers here are open-ended. One thinks perhaps about differences in culture. Maybe the cultures are different in those countries, and the cultures are such in some countries that they lead people to not want to be organ donors, and in other cultures where perhaps people are more conscious of and altruistic, who knows, then they decide to be organ donors. But then when we start looking a bit more closely, we realize that it's a hard story to tell. Take, for example, in the middle, take Austria, the first blue bar, where people are almost 100%, and take Germany, where only 12% of the population are organ donors. Germany and Austria are very similar countries culturally. So why such a difference? Well, to understand what's going on here, we have to think about those hidden biases, and the explanation is beautiful and very, very interesting. It turns out the explanation has to do with the forms that people fill out in those various countries, the European equivalent of the DMV, where you get your driver's license. And it turns out there are two systems. One is an opt-in system where you take the form, you take your driver's license, and then at the bottom there's a box, and you read in the various languages that you have to check the box if you want to participate in the organ donor program. So in other words, by default, it's assumed that you're not an organ donor, but you're given the choice, and if you want to be one, then you check the box. And people tend to not check the box, and therefore they don't join. In other countries, there's an opt-out system in which same thing happens. They have a form, they fill it out. At the bottom, there's a box, and now the default structure is different. By default, now it's assumed that you are an organ donor unless you want to opt out. And so you're told in the appropriate language to check the box if you do not want to participate in the organ donor program. So there again, people are given a choice, just like in the previous case. And there again, because people fundamentally are not different, whether they're in Germany or in Poland or whatnot, people tend to not check the box. But in this case, this has a different consequence because the default is different. People don't check the box, they don't opt out, and therefore they stay in the organ donation program. And that's what explains the difference. It's a simple form at the DMV and two default structures, opt-in or opt-out. But of course, so now we have a beautiful explanation for why we see this discrepancy. And as you can imagine, people have no idea that there is, so the idea is there's a status quo bias, meaning that everything else being equal, unless you really pressure and push people, they're not gonna do something. They're not gonna change the status quo. They're not gonna check the box. And that applies to everyone wherever you are. But not checking the box, depending on what the default setups are, can have dramatically different consequences. In this case, literally a matter of life and death. And of course, people aren't aware of this. If you ask people what's going on, they won't tell you, oh, it's a status quo bias, because they're not aware of this. Hence, the conclusion that these forces that guide our behavior are often hidden. So now I want to take 3 examples of these hidden widespread mechanisms and think about their consequences more specifically to the business world, the world that is familiar to you all and that matters to you. The first example is going to be about predicting our own happiness or unhappiness, which is something we try to do all the time. Before we make a decision, we ask ourselves, well, if I do this, if I change jobs, if I break up with my partner or whatever, how happy or unhappy is that going to make me? Another one that is, of course, very widespread, especially in the business world, is we have to judge others. If you're an employer, you have to judge employees. If you already work with people, you have to assess their performance. Right? So judging others. And of course, we, of course, very often judge ourselves. We think about, well, yes, I'm knowledgeable, I'm competent, or I'm less competent. So we often assess ourselves to decide whether we should engage in some activity or other. So let's take the first idea, so predicting our own happiness. And here I want to talk to you about something that is called effective forecasting, which is, again, our ability to try to predict how happy or unhappy various decisions are going to make us. So what I'm going to do here is summarize a whole lot of research with a simple graph that's going to drive the main point home. So here on this axis, on the horizontal axis, think about time, right? Time flowing from left to right, from present to future, or past to future, if you'd like. And here on the vertical axis, think about emotional intensity. So how intense are the emotions, positive or negative? So how happy is something going to make you, or how unhappy is something going to make you? So let's suppose that at time t0, a person has to make a decision, a business decision, a decision to hire, a decision to switch jobs, what have you, which has some emotional implications, which will, if it's a good decision, bring you happiness and success. And if it's not a good decision, will bring you unhappiness and misery. So what you can do is you can ask people to predict. You can tell them, okay, if you make that decision, if you buy this product, if you get this job, if you do whatever, how happy do you think it's going to make you, and for how long? So we can look at a curve like this, which is the corresponds to the prediction that a person is going to make. And you see two features. You see, well, let me first say, of course, notice that the predicted outcome is what is going to serve as a basis for the decision. You make a decision based on what you expect or what you predict the outcome is going to have as an impact on your happiness or lack thereof. And you can think about the intensity. You think, oh, well, if I do that, it's going to make me, if I buy that new car, it's going to make me super happy, really high. Or if I get laid off, it's going to make me very, very unhappy. And for how long? Well, for a week, for a month, for a year, right? You can predict these two things. And then you can let people make the decisions that they actually were going to make. And you can take a look at their actual experience. Not so much what they predicted, but what they're going through. And you can ask them questions. So how does it feel? How do you feel now? And here's the punchline. The punchline is that you see that these two curves are very different. You see that the actual experience is out of sync with the predictions that you made in the following way. In both negative and positive emotions, people think that various decisions will be much more intense emotionally, will make them happier than they actually do, or will make them less happy than they actually do, and that this will happen for a longer period of time. Now, of course, you can imagine that this is not a very good thing because you base the behavior, the decision on the prediction, and the prediction is really a very bad guide to what you actually experience. So you can easily imagine how this has a range of implications in the business world for example, job evaluation and satisfaction, for product evaluation and satisfaction, for hiring decisions, for decisions to transition from one role to another. Let me turn now to another example, something called the halo effect. So the halo effect is very simple to understand. It's when we unconsciously, again, those forces are hidden, latch on to a trait of a person that we perceive to be attractive. Maybe the person is attractive physically, maybe they're well-dressed, maybe they have a voice that you like, and you assume unconsciously that because that feature is attractive, because they're good at something, it's going to have cascading effects and they'll be good at other things, but of course you don't have any evidence for that. So this happens typically in hiring situations. You meet someone, you have an interview, you discuss things with them, and of course you have a reaction to them. A lot of that is unconscious. You think that the person is attractive, charming, efficient, punctual, whatever. And then you have to make decisions based on that. But of course, you're not aware of this bias. This has been discussed a lot in the business literature. And of course, this can have also dramatic consequences because your gut there, because of the halo effect, which is a bias, inaccurate bias, can have really bad consequences. I want to focus here on a second on the cost of mishires. So you hire someone because you think they're going to be great, because somehow unconsciously you found something attractive about them, and you think therefore they'll be a high performer and they'll be a good team player and everything, but turns out they're not because you were misled by your gut. So there's been research on this, for example, by Bradford Smart, who's looked at over 50 companies and has found, just to give you an idea of the cost, that the average cost of a mishire, so you hire someone, turns out they're not the right person, they have to be let go, of a manager earning $100,000 is $1.5 million for the company. Costly indeed. For an average sales rep earning $100,000, the cost is roughly $500,000. Not to mention, of course, the effects on employee morale if the person's not the right person for that role, customer experience, work product, and this is very widespread. In that particular study, the estimates is that mishires and bad promotions, promoting someone based on the halo effect that should not have been promoted, range from 25 to 75% of cases. So again, this halo effect, this unconscious bias to assume based on a good trait or characteristics that it's going to transfer to other aspects, can have really costly effects. I want to mention now the last one, what is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, and that's now about how we evaluate ourselves. So again, I'm going to summarize a lot of research now by showing you a graph that captures the essence of the effect. So here on this axis, we have the amount of competence that somebody has in some area or other, IT, Excel, accounting, whatever you want. And of course, you can range from not having any competence at all to being an expert. And here we're going to look at the person's confidence, just a bit like when I asked you earlier, how confident are you that you know how a bike works? And here's what's really interesting. What the research finds is that when people have little competence and understanding in a particular area, they tend to be supremely confident, which is, of course, a bad combination. So that's the Homer Simpson sort of effect, right? As competence increases, you see that people's confidence starts to decline. They realize, oh, wow, yeah, that topic is actually more complex than I thought. So maybe I'm not as expert as I think I was. And then, of course, it picks up again. As you become more knowledgeable and more of an expert, your confidence goes up again. But the problem here is that a lot of people make decisions when they are at that point where they think they're very confident that they understand the issue, they understand the ramifications, and they make a decision, but in fact they don't. And this really can happen at any level, and especially at higher levels. So imagine a top manager who is a well-rounded individual, has good education and lots of experience, but of course we don't all know everything there is to know about everything. And so that person's confident that, yes, I can handle that legal issue, I can handle that IT issue, and so I'll make a decision. The trouble is that because of this effect, they are fooling themselves. And this can have dramatic consequences for companies, financial, legal, in terms of human capital. So we're good, about to wrap up now. So I want to tell you a bit about mindware now, these tools that can be used to boost your brain power and try to avoid this minefield that we just talked about. So the bad news is that we have a mind that doesn't work the way we think it does. We have all kinds of hidden forces and biases that are lurking underneath the surface that shape our thinking, decisions, judgment, and lead to suboptimal decisions. And this can have, of course, enormous consequences. And that's the bad news. The good news, so another way to say this, by the way, is that most people, by no fault of their own, nature did not give us an instruction manual, after all, on how to use our brains and minds. Most people do not use their minds or their brains optimally. So if you've seen the movie Limitless, there's a pill to take care of that. You can take it, and then you can become an absolute genius and a master of everything. But of course, the real world doesn't work like that. Fortunately, the good news is that just as in the case of our senses, which can be fooled, we've devised instruments to enhance their power and precision. In the case of thinking, we have an app, metaphorically speaking, to enhance the power and precision of our thinking. And that is a critical thinking app that can be, metaphorically speaking, downloaded into people's minds and brains. This app has two broad features. It contains a number of tools that allow you to understand the world around you better, the business world, the corporate world, the world of accounting, the world of HR, the world of hiring. It gives you communication tools, logical tools to avoid certain logical fallacies, tools to better understand other people with whom you interact all the time, tools to reason about numbers and probabilities, very important for certain areas, tools to reason about causality. Did that really cause this? Did what I do cause a spike in sales, for example? Tools to reason, broadly speaking, scientifically. And then another set of tools which allow you to better understand the instrument with which you think, make decisions, judge, form plans, goals, etc. These are tools to better understand the operation of your own mind, including your own biases and blind spots, tools to use your mind more efficiently, and tools to take better care of your brain and mind, just the way one can take better care of one's body when one goes, say, for example, to the gym. So let me now talk about briefly the 5 virtues of critical thinking. Then I'll mention some resources, and then I'll be delighted to take questions from you. What's very nice about critical thinking is that it has a number of powerful virtues. The first is that its scope is universal. in the sense that it can be applied to any area and any problem that you can think about, whether they involve numbers or people or projections or reasoning or analysis or anything you want. That's really nice. The second is what I call user diversity. It doesn't matter who you are. It's blind to that. In other words, anybody and everybody can use these tools in principle. The third feature that is very important is durability. It's a bit like learning to ride a bike. Once you know how to ride a bike, you tend to not forget. And you can not ride a bike for 20 years and get back on it and you know how to do it. So critical thinking works a bit like that. There's a really wonderful quote by Thomas Paine who said that once enlightened, a mind cannot again go dark. So the skills that you pick up are durable. Number 4, which is also important, is those skills are going to give you an edge because critical thinking, based on what we've learned in the sciences of the mind, isn't something that is widely understood and widely taught and everything, although of course there are cases where you have seminars and everything. So that is likely to give you an edge if that's what you're interested in. And the final thing is that it has ratcheting power, meaning that once you've picked up some of those skills, you can use those skills to make better decisions about how to improve the skills again. So to give you an example, if you look at the section of a bookstore that's on business decisions and self-help, etc., you'll see a plethora of books. And of course, the question is, which ones are good? Some are good, some of them are much less good. And how do you decide? Well, once you've applied and you've learned some of the skills, you want to do more learning, then you can use those skills as a ratchet to then go look for and critically evaluate the things that you will need down the road. So we're going to wrap up now. We have about another minute or so before we take questions. So I want to mention some resources if you're interested. Of course, there are a lot of them, so I can't mention everything, but I want to mention 3 sets of 2 books. The first 2 are books that are broad and talk about critical thinking in a broad way, applicable, of course, directly to the business world, in fact, geared towards business decisions and the business world. The first one is called Critical Thinking, a beginner's guide to critical thinking, better decision making, and problem solving by Jennifer Wilson. The one on the right, the green one, is called Think Smarter, Critical Thinking to Improve Problem Solving and Decision Making Skills by Michael Khalid. These are 2 good books. They're very practical. These 2 are a bit more academic, if you will, but they're very, very good. So the one on the left, and I know Leon and I talked about this, it's a book that Leon likes very much too. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 and who is a cognitive psychologist. So this will give you a lot of information about how your mind actually works and errors that one can make along the way in all kinds of domains. It's a really fantastic book, and it'll contain lots and lots of references. A slightly lighter read is Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions by Daniel Ariely, who's a behavioral economist. And then I want to mention 2 books that perhaps are a bit more personal if you're interested in job satisfaction, life satisfaction, what's going to make me happy. Think about effective forecasting, something we talked about earlier. The one on the left is called Stumbling on Happiness by Harvard professor Daniel Gilbert. And the one on the right is called The Time Paradox. So time is of the essence. Time is very important. Money is important, but time is even more important in a sense because we don't replenish it. Money you can win and lose and make and lose, but time, it basically only diminishes as your life goes on. So that's another really good book. I want to end with a quote now to end on time that kind of summarizes in a sort of philosophical way perhaps what we've been talking about. And here's the quote: "It is a myth that we only use 10% of our brains." It really is. It's not true. But it is an unfortunate reality that most people do not use their minds optimally. If critical thinking was better understood, and if it were to become the cornerstone of our educational policies, if it served as the backbone of professional development, we would all become better versions of ourselves and create a better and happier world for everyone. Who said that? I did, just here and now. So with this, I want to thank you very much. And I think that Leon will take over from here and we'll maybe take questions and have have some fun and nice interactions.
Julian, thank you very, very much for that thoughtful, thought-provoking presentation, and we are open for questions. I was thinking, as I looked at those books, you mentioned a lot of great ones, Thinking Fast and Slow, Critical Thinking, Think Smarter. For folks who want to order the books, it may take a little bit, but what can folks who are listening on today, what can they do to start working on their critical thinking skills like right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So as you said, you're going to need these tools, you're going to need these books, but what you can start to do right now is you can start to apply this frame of mind of being inquisitive and critical and question various assumptions and maybe hidden assumptions by simply, when you look at the news, you look at the news, for example, every day, I hope, then you can start to ask yourself whether what you're seeing might be biased or what the intentions of the writers are and what the source of the writing is. You can do this in your interactions with other people. Very often you notice that communication is not optimal. People talk past each other, somebody says something, somebody else answers in a way that's not relevant. So if you start to put yourself in a frame of mind where you're more analytical and you start to think about, well, that's interesting, why is this conversation not going the way it should? It's going to begin to sharpen the sense, going to begin to make you attentive to these various things. And then, of course, you can buy the books, you should, to learn more about these forces that I've talked about and to learn how to sharpen your powers even more. And then you can continue to do that, and you can apply these tools eventually to any area of your life that you want to enhance and improve as far as your thinking and judgment and decision making are concerned.
Fabulous, great. I have another question for you. You mentioned the halo effect, and certainly we want to think highly of ourselves, but we don't want to go too far.
Yes.
How can we go through our day, one, to maintain our confidence, but still not really go overboard with the halo effect? How can we have more sort of self-recognition, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, right? So there's a tension here, notice, between, of course, on the one hand, we all want to feel good about ourselves. I mean, who wants to go around their days thinking, oh, I don't know anything, you know, I'm biased and this and that. So I think the trick here is to recognize two things, is to recognize that indeed, we're not perfect, we have flaws, and we may not think optimally, but in a way, that's very powerful because now we know ourselves better and we're more accurate about who we are and what we can do. And so that's a source of enormous pride. We understand how we function better. So that you could derive a lot of confidence from that. But I guess underlyingly, these two skills are somewhat orthogonal. You can certainly work, and there are techniques to improve your confidence, to feel better about yourself on a daily basis. And of course, your interactions with people are going to help. I mean, if you get praise and compliments and everything, yes. Or if something you do succeed, you're going to feel better. But at the back of your mind, you also have to remain critical about yourself and know that however good you feel and should feel, when it's time to make decisions or tackle certain problems, be a bit humble about your ability and ask yourself, well, do I really know how this works? And if I assume that I do and I make a decision and I don't really know how it works, what consequences is it going to have? Is it going to make the company lose money? Is it going to get the company into legal trouble? So I think there's a way to reconcile these two things. On the one hand, to be humble and honest about our powers and to try to improve them. And on the other hand, to seek experiences and frames of mind to make us feel good about ourselves and confident on a daily basis.
Sure. And along those lines, you were talking about following your head versus following your gut.
Yes.
So in essence, were you saying that we need to gather data to make more thoughtful, more critical decisions?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So here I want to make a sharp distinction. So there are instances, of course, where we do want to follow our gut. For example, if you fall in love, then it's wonderful, and you fall in love for reasons you don't really understand, and that's great. And so you should follow your gut. If your gut tells you that you're in love with someone, then You don't have to be analytical about it. You just, great, it's wonderful. But of course, there are many other areas where we really have to use our heads, because our gut, for reasons that I could talk about later if you'd like, is not the right guide. There's a famous quote by Stephen Colbert on this, which I really like. When he did the Colbert Report, he said he was mocking certain decision-making that people in the political arena made. And he said, every night on my show, the Colbert Report, I give you the truth straight from the gut, unfiltered by rational argument. So especially in areas which are complex, which are linked to technology and finance and law, all these aspects of modern society for which our gut, which evolved a long time ago, isn't very prepared, that's where we have to switch to from automatic mode to manual mode, and be much more careful. And try to collect data and try to have more objective measures to base our decisions on. But that doesn't leave no role for the gut, right? That's important. But we have to learn when to use one and the other. That's very important too. And critical thinking does tell you that and gives you tools to help you better do that.
Sure. And you were talking about mindware and how we can improve ourselves. And of course, we all want to get better. But how will we know, or how long does it actually take to become an efficient critical thinker?
Yeah, that's also a very, very good question. Of course, we would ideally all like to be able to do what, what's his name, the actor in Limitless, I'm blanking on his name right now, Bradley Cooper, there we go, did, which he was a sort of a writer who was not successful and didn't have a great life and everything. And then he basically started taking those pills, and all of a sudden he became like a genius and he was successful. So ideally, we'd like to be able to do that. The reality is that it doesn't work like that. It's a slower process. And in a sense, it's sort of a lifelong quest. Perhaps there's no endpoint. We can always improve and always become better. But that also doesn't mean that it will take years and years. I mean, you can start making progress very quickly. It's like many things in life. It depends on how serious and motivated and driven a person is. And there's lots that can be done reasonably quickly by taking seminars, reading books, and starting to apply these tools. And then, like I said, they have this ratcheting effect, which is really, really nice. So it's hard to quantify exactly how long it takes, but it doesn't take years to start to see real progress and to start to make better decisions. And that's the good news.
Great. Well, questions are still open, but we're gonna close it down soon.
Okay.
You talked about motivation, and I think that's important. When you think about improving yourself, let's say even physically, yep. Going to the gym and keeping yep. keeping your body in great shape. Mm-hmm. What can we do really to take care of our brains, to keep our brains in shape?
Yeah. So also really, really good question. And here I'm going to say something that is going to sound both obvious and perhaps less obvious. And I can mention a book that is absolutely phenomenal. And it's a very simple thing that people can do. And the answer is sleep. I'm not kidding. So we now understand much better why we sleep and what sleep does. And people who've done research on sleep over the last few decades have learned that, especially in a country like the US, we're a sleep-deprived country, and that this has a range of implications, not least of which is that when we are not sleeping enough, our minds, again, it may sound cliche, but it's really true, and it's really backed up by a large amount of research. Our minds and brains do not function optimally in all kinds of ways. So that's a very simple fix. And the truth is that most people need a full 8 hours of sleep. The benefits are phenomenal. And that's a very easy thing that people can do. Sleep better. And there are things you can do. There are sleep doctors and sleep clinics if you have trouble sleeping. But it may just be as simple as getting enough sleep. And Now, of course, I understand that a lot of people are busy, have busy lives, and they're juggling different roles. They're employees and their parents and their friends and their family people. But if you can try to really focus on that and get the sleep that you need, that is going to do wonders for the efficiency of your mind/brain. And if you're curious about this, I would recommend an absolutely fascinating book. It's a popular book, so it's very easy to read, but it's anchored and based on the most extensive, up-to-date research that is available. And the book is called Why We Sleep. And the author is, see, I have so many books floating in my head. I'm blanking on, I can't think of the author off the top of my head, but I can't. But the book, you'll type in Amazon, Why We Sleep.
Well, Julian, if folks are motivated, do you mind if I give them your email address if they want to communicate with you?
By all means, yes. Please feel free to get in touch with me. I love those interactions, and absolutely, yes.
Sure. So it's Julian, Julien, Julian M, at ruccs.rutgers.edu. Well, Julian, this has been fascinating. Thank you for all of your suggestions and making it practical for us. And I want to thank all of our attendees for participating in this discussion. Just a friendly reminder, everyone listening to our virtual Lunch and Learn series, it takes place monthly, and our goal is to make it easy for you to remember. Think of meeting us in the middle. This means that the webinars take place in the middle of each month, the middle of the week, and in the middle of the day. For more information, you can always visit our website, which is business.rutgers.edu/alumni/lifelong-learning. So even though we already have a very exciting schedule of topics and speakers for the next few months, we're open to suggestions. So please stay with us for a moment as our webinar closes. You'll see a very brief survey about today's webinar. It's just 3 questions. And one of those questions is a free form field that you can type in suggested topics and our presenters. Lastly, as I mentioned when we started, we're going to send you a link in our email, into your email rather, to the archive recording of this presentation, and that will be sent out very soon. It can also be found on the Business Insights page of our website. So for Christina Murphy, I'm Leon Fraser for Rutgers Business School Executive Education. Thank you and have a great day.